Welcome to drivenmavens.com, and we're going to continue on with our introduction to layers on part 2 and how I use them on a digital painting. So at the bottom we've got layer 0, which is actually my background layer. So I'm going to rename this background. And what that background allows me to do, I'm going to actually shut the rest of the image off. Okay, so I turn that off. So this is what the background looks like. So I started off with this because it gives me a color format that I want to work with. So I already have something kind of like in my head with the color scheme that I want, and I always start off with the gradient tool and paint that background because it breaks up the white space and it gives me something to work with. Okay, so now working with layers basically creates a hierarchy in your workflow. So whatever you have on the top layer is going to be on top of the layers that are underneath. So every layer that you create that has a drawing or a painting or pixels that have been already filled only affects that particular layer. It doesn't affect any other layer. Every layer is separate. So when I start off with the digital painting, I start off with laying out my perspective line. So here I have a layer. There's nothing else on this layer except for these lines. Now below that is my line drawing. So now I've got a line drawing on top of that layer, or underneath that layer. So for the line drawing, I always keep this above the painted layers because as I'm drawing or as I'm painting, if you're doing if you remember analog techniques, you're basically taking your sheet of tracing paper and you're marking it in the back with some chalk, and then you're transferring that drawing onto your canvas or to a larger sheet of paper, whether you're doing watercolor. It's the same principle here because the difficulty with analog is that once you start painting, those lines start to disappear, so you don't have that reference anymore. But in Photoshop it works the same way. If I had put these, let's say if I put these line drawings here in the bottom, then, or that layer in the bottom underneath the card painting that you see here in that hierarchy, then it's going to end up covering up that line drawing and I'm not going to see that reference. Now I'm going to actually ungroup this because I actually grouped the whole card painting portion of it. So I'm going to say ungroup layer, so now they're all on its own. Okay, so now that I have my perspective, my line drawing, and I've got my background, I start painting right away. So I start establishing my base color. So I just start off with the base color layer. And then from the base color layer, I've got some additional body and wheel details. And so what it allows me to do is that as I'm doing this, so I typically start to put things, put an additional layer just to experiment, just to make sure I'm headed in the right direction. And then from there, I've got another layer where I can actually paint in the number. It looks like I painted in that layer anyway with something else in the background, and then after that I finish off the background and the details. So I get all my debris, all the smoke effects and that sort of thing. I will go ahead and complete that on a separate layer. Now one of the main things you do want to do is that you don't want to have too many layers. You want to limit the amount of layers, but you don't want to have too few layers that you can't correct some of your mistakes as you're going through your digital painting process. So the more layers that you have, the larger your file size, and it takes up more space. But then once everything is completed, you can go ahead and flatten all those layers. So you can go to the layer on the top of the menu, and there's something called Flatten the Image. And what it says, it asks you, do you want to discard hidden layers? And you say okay. And it'll go through the process of flattening this image out. And just wait for it to catch up for us. Okay, so now that's done. Now everything is one complete background. Okay, so let's recap and summarize the uses for layers in general. So the first thing we did was to establish our perspective lines. That helps you to kind of falls right into number 2, is to help set up your line drawing. After that, it's, all these layers are really there to help you with the flexibility of making any of your corrections by segregating all these elements. And then fourth is to just detail out the painting. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next time on drivenmavens.com. Thanks.